we are on verdict watch in the Lindsay Clancy murder trial. The jury is continuing to deliberate this morning. They will eventually decide whether Clancy goes to prison or potentially to a mental health facility if it's not a hung jury. Deliberations began yesterday after the judge told the jury he has faith that they will come to a just verdict.
Please have confidence in what you're about to do, all right? I have that confidence in you. I don't think I've ever seen a more dedicated group of jurors in any trial that I've ever been involved in.
Shanelle Kaul joins us now. She's been in the courthouse and covering every twist and turn in this trial. Shanelle, good morning once again. We understand people have been called back to the courtroom. What's the latest information you have?
Yeah, we have some breaking news here in Plymouth, Massachusetts for you. Hearing just moments ago, people were called back in. That is, members of the media were called back in. Errol and Adriana, we're hearing that the jurors have a question for the judge. Now, ordinarily, what would happen in these kinds of situations is they would send a note with that question to the judge. We'll see whether or not he'll read that out loud so we can get a better understanding of what it is that they're seeking clarification on. At this point, I can tell you that our producers are just being let back into the courtroom, so we don't know exactly what that question is. The attorneys in this case, both prosecutors and the defense attorney, I'm hearing, are in sidebar right now, so stand by for more details on that. But I can also tell you that as he walked into court this morning, Kevin Reddington, who is Lindsay Clancy's defense attorney, said when asked about whether he thinks the jurors will reach a verdict today, he said, "I hope so." And he was also asked about how Lindsay Clancy is feeling now that all of this is over and we're now into deliberations. He said that she was nervous and scared right now. We know jurors yesterday deliberated for a couple of hours. Again, they're back at it this morning, hearing they do have a question. Unclear, though, at this point, how long they're going to deliberate for. But keep in mind, they've got this huge tranche of evidence to comb through. There were photos, there were videos, there were text messages, there were diary entries, there was that chilling 911 phone call. And then there were over 80 witnesses who testified over the course of this week's-long trial. So they've got a lot to get through. Once we get some clarity and understanding of the question that they just asked the judge, we'll bring that to you live.
All right, Shanelle, I know you will. Thank you so much. CBS News legal contributor Caroline Polisi is with us now. Caroline, we don't know what this question is, but does it indicate anything that there is a question relatively early in deliberations? Because they just got back to the courtroom this morning and they have a question.
Yeah, I think absolutely. The judge made a note that this jury was one of the most conscientious juries he's seen maybe ever, just based on the feedback he's gotten in the courtroom. They're taking notes. They're listening intently. Clearly, they're taking this very heavy job seriously. And so I think a question shows that they're really engaging in robust discussion because, they didn't just take a straw poll at the beginning and say, let's do this. So regardless of what the question is, we know that they're taking this seriously. They could have a question about the evidence or they could have a question about the law. So, they might want a playback of some of the testimony. They might have an issue with, they have a computer back there with all the exhibits. But oftentimes, jurors have questions about the law because it is a little bit complicated. Those jury instructions, took over an hour to read to them. So they, it's often like it's like a math problem, actually. It's not just guilty or not guilty. There are elements of each offense. And so a lot of times jurors get confused about the law. And what's going to happen now is the judge is going to confer with both of the lawyers before he decides how to answer the jurors.
And as we wait for guidance on what that question is or what might happen next, I want to ask you about a central question I've had as I've listened to closing arguments, which all comes down to what psychosis is and how that should inform a juror's decision, because that seems to be the central issue. Lindsay Clancy admitted to killing her children, but her team says it was
PPP, postpartum psychosis,
a complicated word I don't use typically. But what is the central question when it comes to that? Why is that something the jury needs to get their hands around?
Yeah, well, it's confusing because in many ways throughout the coverage of this trial, we've been using that PPP, postpartum psychosis, as sort of a stand-in for the legal test, but they're not the same, right? It's not a medical diagnosis. So the reason we're using that as a stand-in because oftentimes in cases of psychosis, women can experience what's known as command hallucinations, forcing them to do things. We had an expert testify that these voices in her head were commanding her to do things, that she really wasn't in control of her body. That is getting you into the legal standard of being unable to conform your actions to the standards of the law. And so that's why it's really important, that testimony. But you know, we'll just have to see. There was a lot of conflicting evidence on both sides based off of the same symptomology. So you had different experts saying these symptoms show me that she was in a state of severe depression, and you had others saying these symptoms show me she was going into a state of psychosis. So we'll have to see what they decide.
Does it boil down to the jury deciding whether she knew what she was doing? Is that a way to look at it?
Whether she knew what she was doing was wrong. And so
she knew what she was doing was wrong.
that's actually really interesting, because that doesn't necessarily, even if she knew what she was doing, and clearly she knew what she was doing, because that's part of what the prosecution is saying. This was methodical, planned out to a T. That's not necessarily mutually exclusive with the defense here, because you can be coherent in psychosis if you're operating under a mistaken belief that, for example, what you're doing is not wrong, or what you're doing is actually the right thing to be doing. Then that's the legal issue. That's why it's really complicated based on, you know, the law as well as the diagnosis.
Yeah, the jury has a tough issue in front of them, but they're being diligent, according to the judge. They have this question they've asked, and we'll update you all on what we learn as the hours move on.
Yes, and Caroline, stay close.
I will.
Indeed. Caroline, thank you very much.